The Clerk.
Committee and Delegation Reports, Order of the Day number 1, Joint Standing Committee on Migration, report on immigration detention in Australia, a new beginning, criteria for release from immigration detention, resumption of debate on the motion that the House take note of the report.
The question is that the document be noted. The member for Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Acting Speaker. It is a privilege to be able to speak on the release of this report by the Joint Standing Committee on Immigration. It's the Immigration Detention in Australia, a new beginning, criteria for release from detention. This report is the first of 3 reports under the inquiry's terms of reference. This report addresses the criteria that should be applied in determining how long a person should be held in immigration detention, the criteria that should be applied in determining when a person should be released from immigration detention following health and security checks, review mechanisms for ongoing detention, for removal practices and detention debts. The second and third reports will be tabled in 2009 and will address alternatives to detention, financial costs, service provision and the infrastructure required to support the immigration detention framework for the future. Currently, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker, there are about 280 people in detention in Australia as at the figures of the 7th of November this year. While this report was largely a bipartisan effort and all members agreed to the 18 recommendations, 3 members filed a dissenting report expressing their concerns about the appropriate timeframe when access to judicial review should be available for detainees, but I will leave those members to record their point of view on this issue. I see this report and its recommendations as part of a continuing process of evolution of Australia's policy in the processing of unlawful arrivals to our shores. Madam Acting Speaker, you may recall that in 2005, the previous coalition government moved to improve the detention process and practice. The coalition provided that the Commonwealth Ombudsman have the obligation to review the circumstances of people held in detention for over 2 years and to report its advice to the Minister. Further, in 2005, with bipartisan support, the Howard Coalition moved to prevent children and families being held in detention centres and instead ensured children and their families were appropriately housed in residential housing within the community. In this regard, I acknowledge the excellent contribution and hard work of the member for Pearce, Mrs Judy Moylan, the then member for Cook, Mr Bruce Baird, and the member for Kooyong, Mr Petro Georgiou, who is here in the chamber today, and who is also a member of this Joint Standing Committee. Further, it also should be noted that the previous coalition government moved to close down detention centres. Woomera was closed in 2003, Port Hedland was closed, and also Baxter was closed in the August of 2007. I believe that the 18 recommendations in this report further refine this evolutionary progress and, in fairness and equity, seek to establish the important balance of acknowledging the duty of care that the government has to the people in the wider Australian community, as well as preserving the sovereignty of Australia and maintaining mandatory detention as an essential component of strong border control, while at the same time, and I think this is important, acknowledging the basic human rights of unauthorised arrivals and the inherent human dignity of each and every one of them. The report attempts to set out a process of dealing with unauthorised arrivals in a manner that is open and transparent, and not only for the people of Australia, but for the detainees as well. I think this report has succeeded, and although I am aware that there are those who have already criticised the report for going too far, as well as those who have criticised the report for not going far enough, so it seems to be that we've probably got the balance just about right. Before I briefly cover the recommendations, I would like to acknowledge the excellent support to the committee that has been received from the Inquiry Secretariat, headed by Dr Anna Dakra, the Inquiry Secretary, Ms Anna Engwerder-Smith, Senior Research Officer, Mr Stephen Tisser, and the Office Manager, Mrs Melita Caulfield. I wish to record my appreciation for their professional and enthusiastic support and for their active interest in the subject of this report. Most particularly, I wish to record my respect for the personal commitment and unrelenting focus by each member of the Secretariat in their response to the many requests by members of the committee. I believe their conspicuous attention to detail ensured that we produced a well-researched and intellectually rigorous report that will be of great interest to many Australian families. Now, this report was undertaken against the immigration detention policy framework that was set out by the Minister of Immigration and Citizenship on the 29th of July 2008, and I would just like to cover those particular sets of values because they are 7 in number and they do provide the basis on which we investigated conducted the inquiry. The first was that mandatory detention is an essential component of strong border control. The second, to support the integrity of Australia's immigration program, 3 groups will be subject to mandatory detention. 1. All unauthorised arrivals for management of health, identity and security risks to the community. 2. Unlawful non-citizens who present unacceptable risks to the community. And 3. Unlawful non-citizens who have repeatedly refused to comply with their visa conditions. Number 3. Children, including juvenile foreign fishers and, where possible, their families, will not be detained in an immigration detention centre. Number 4, detention that is indefinite or otherwise arbitrary is not acceptable, and the length and conditions of detention, including the appropriateness of both the accommodation and the services provided, will be subject to regular review. Number 5, detention in immigration detention centres is only to be used as a last resort and for the shortest practicable time. Number 6, people in detention will be treated fairly and reasonably within the law. And number 7, conditions of detention will ensure the inherent dignity of the human person. Now, Madam Acting Speaker,